a message that communicates a sense of enoughness in this current moment. I don't think that can be reiterated enough. That truly has become like the ethos of our entire ministry. The slogan for SMU is World Changers Shaped Here. We made stickers this year that say World Changers Rest Here. Because I just wanted people to know, like, this is who we are. There's not an expectation that you come and you have answers or that you exert yourself here. It really is meant to be a place of rest and respite. Now, granted, I think the flip side of that, right, is there's also this very real desire from this generation to take action and to be involved in justice work and justice ministry. And so there's a balance there too, especially as a pastor, of like how to encourage this restful Sabbath space that feels countercultural, while also engaging in these conversations and these very real wrestlings with how to do justice in the world.
Welcome to the More Than Sunday podcast. We're so glad that you joined us. I'm Rohini Drake, and I'm on staff here at First United Methodist Church, Richardson. And on this season of the podcast, we've been talking to influencers. Not necessarily the TikTok and YouTube influencers you might know, but people who are in their community and impacting positive change wherever they go. And so today we're glad to be joined by our co-host, Eric Czechowski, and our guest, Jessie Light-Wells, who is the campus pastor at UKirk, which is a campus ministry of the Presbyterian Church USA at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And Jessie, thank you so much for being here.
I'm grateful. Thanks for having me.
And Eric, thanks for being co-host.
Always fun to be back for a conversation. Yeah.
So Jessie, would you mind just sharing with us a little bit more about your work at UKirk and who you serve with and who you serve there?
Absolutely. So I planted UKirk SMU as a church plant campus ministry in 2019. And the purpose of planting that ministry was to offer a space on campus that was fully affirming and welcoming of LGBTQ people. Formerly, that didn't exist. And so that was sort of our niche that we had carved out. And that has proved to be something really needed and desired. So a lot of our students identify as LGBTQ. But in addition to that, what we've found is that many of the students that we serve didn't have a place before UKirk for whatever reason. Maybe it was that they were experiencing a shift in their faith. And so they had grown up in a different tradition and weren't able to ask questions or reached a point in that faith tradition where they felt excluded or marginalized for some reason. We have a lot of people who are actively deconstructing their beliefs, which makes for a really interesting community. And then I would also say a lot of students who really just need a place to take a deep breath and to rest. SMU is a really, really high pressure environment. And so there's a lot of stakes for students. They're facing just a lot of expectations, both academically, socially. Many of them are balancing a great deal of leadership opportunities or work or family priorities. So this space exists first and foremost as a place for them to be and to be nourished and nurtured in faith.
So I live in a house that, when we talk about generations and thinking about college students, in my house, there's technically Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z, and now we even have a Gen Alpha.
Starting over.
Starting all over again. But so in the context of these generations, I know there's identifiers and things, based on our experiences and even technology that we grew up with or didn't grow up with, that kind of give context to the generation. So
Sure.
with the students that you're working with, this college age, which I assume is Gen Z,
Mm-hmm.
can you give us some of those like identifiers? Like
Sure.
what's important to them? What are you hearing from them that's important to them?
Yeah, absolutely. This is such a fascinating generation, and I'm sure that we could say that about any generation going through college. One of the things that I have paid really careful attention to is the role that these students play in their family systems or in society. So, one of the interesting tensions I've noticed is that there's both a sense of expectation at an earlier age of achievement, of fulfilling responsibilities, kind of being an adult, having a lot on their plate. And at the same time, I've read some research that says that actually all of our developmental ages are getting pushed up a little bit. That because people are living longer, some of these real transitions into different stages of life are happening later. So one of the things that I think is really fascinating about Gen Z, at least the students I've worked with, is they both have this very mature sense of being in the world, right? Like they can ask good questions. They can wrestle with some really significant stuff. And at the same time, they may go home more often because they're still really connected to their family. Or they may not have ever learned to drive a car. Or they might not know how to handle interpersonal conflict because they haven't had the chance to practice that. So there's this real tension between almost like behavior versus what they're articulating. And I've really had to learn a lot in that space and just sort of listen with students and say, okay, I hear you and I sense you wanting to go deeper on this. And let me teach you basic like human 101.
Here's how to be a human.
Yeah. Like sometimes I just, for example, like, you know, in student relationships with one another, like a lot of them are in therapy, which is amazing, right? Like people are starting to see licensed professionals earlier for mental health issues that are much sort of more normalized than they used to be, which I'm so grateful for. As a pastor, I'm like, thank God for therapists and for our relationship with them. But I'm just thinking like, okay, students are wondering how to be in relationship with each other. One of the things I've taught a lot of students is about triangulation, right? Here's what triangulation means. Here's how it might be appearing in your relationship or your friendship. And then, you know, in the next breath, they'll be like, so what do you think about death? You know, so like there's this real back and forth of like, wow, there's some really profound stuff happening within this generation. And there's some stuff that maybe in the past there was already progress made in that realm. I don't know. It's fascinating.
Wow. So in talking about, you mentioned early the difference in maybe the development of some of these skills. We're in the midst of a worship series called Influencers and looking at the things that influence people, and specifically in talking about Gen Z, as you guys mentioned, what are the things that you feel like are influencing them? Are those the things that are causing these differences in development? And I guess depending on what the influence is, do you see them positive influences, negative influences? Like what are those things that you see in the students that you work with?
Yeah. Gosh, there are so many influences out there. I mean, like an overall catch-all for that would definitely be just social media, right? Like there's so much out there that is bite-sized. And even thinking about like the therapy realm or the self-help realm, like there are 30-second videos that pop up on Instagram and TikTok that use terminology around therapy or helping yourself or even spiritual topics that students really latch onto. And I think that's part of where this like linguistic maturity comes in, is that there's an awareness of topics and areas of the world that is much more mature because there are people who are putting out these really bite-sized pieces of it. So my students are very adept at talking about themselves and about like diagnosing themselves or throwing around words like trauma or thinking about mental health issues. And I think that is mostly positive, but I also think it's sometimes it's contextless. So you might think you know something or that you've learned something, and really you have like the surface level understanding of what that means. So there's always this back and forth of how these kind of how these things become popularized and then people latch onto them. And I think that is definitely happening in the spiritual realm. There's a huge movement in social media talking about church trauma, deconstruction, what it means to be ex-evangelical, like how to sort of wrestle with your faith when it's hurt you or damaged you. And I think overall, again, that's positive, but it can create a lot of skepticism toward traditional faith traditions or just even any sense of church or gathering places.
And as you're talking about that, I'm thinking, yes, I know as I scroll on my own social media, how easily accessible it is to just encounter all sorts of thoughts and ideas, and especially around spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And so, 30-second clips, 1-minute clips, context or no, it's out there to consume. So from your work with the students in Gen Z, what do you feel like their spiritual needs are based on like what they gravitate, like be the algorithm for us? Like what are they gravitating towards, or what are they looking for even more than what they're finding in social media?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the message that has most resonated over the years of my work with this particular generation is a message of enoughness, and a message that gives permission to rest. And granted, I'm in a context where that is that sense of hustle and achievement is very pervasive, but I don't think that that's just at SMU, right? And I think that we all feel that to some extent, but particularly those who are moving through this really just what's supposed to be this time of life where all these decisions get made and people are deciding things about who they are and where they want to be in the world and what they value. A message that communicates a sense of enoughness in this current moment. I don't think that can be reiterated enough. That truly has become like the ethos of our entire ministry. The slogan for SMU is "World Changers Shaped Here." We made stickers this year that say "World Changers Rest Here," because I just wanted people to know, like, this is who we are. There's not an expectation that you come and you have answers or that you exert yourself here. It really is meant to be a place of rest and respite. Now, granted, I think the flip side of that, right, is there's also this very real desire from this generation to take action and to be involved in justice work and justice ministry. And so there's a balance there too, especially as a pastor, of like how to encourage this restful Sabbath space that feels countercultural, while also engaging in these conversations and these very real wrestlings with how to do justice in the world. And that's hard. but I think the tension is good. So
hearing you talk about how you've sort of positioned Kirk U to be a place where people can be and be a place where people can rest. Recognizing, as you mentioned, that there are a lot of people out there, and maybe specifically in Gen Z, that may not trust sort of the church as it has existed in the past, or maybe even if it's not that far, may not feel like there's anything to be gained by being a part of it. So as an organization that falls under that descriptor, what are the things that we can do as a church to minister to folks that you work with who you've named already? They may be looking for a place of rest. We try hard to offer things, but often that looks like programming, right? And it sounds like programming maybe isn't the thing that people are looking for when they need some rest, or they need a place to just be, or they need to be reminded that they're enough. So is that community? Is that online ministry? What do you perceive are ways that a church who strongly desires to be in community and to be ministering to people that you work with, how do we do that?
Right. Yeah. I think 3 particular things come to mind. The first is definitely building and fostering a sense of community that is not inherently tied to bringing one's brain into play, right? So worship, I think, is a great opportunity for people to rest. It's participatory, but it also invites people to really just sit and be and dwell in God's presence at the same time. So I think finding ways to communicate worship as that space is vital and valuable. Reminding people that when they come to worship, they are coming to be in communion with one another and with God. And that there's not any particular expectation of them in that moment. I also think that one of my main ways of viewing evangelism is through the lens of care. And so obviously on a college campus, like my call is to be present there. But I also think churches have a responsibility to be in the community looking for ways to care for the community. And that's not just about getting people to the church. It's also about how our time as church folks is spent really intentionally offering care, rest, listening ears to people who may never show up here. I think it's easier on a campus because there's entry points, but I imagine that there are ways that we could be doing that as churches that are a little bit more outside of the box. And then the third thing that is really tangible, this is actually part of my work at First Presbyterian Dallas, where I serve in addition to UKirk. We have started a group called Shifting Faith. This is for young adults primarily, and it's a support group. So it's not re-indoctrination. It's not Bible study. It's not at all about cultivating a sense of theology. It's actually about providing support to people who have felt hurt by the church or who have really significant questions about what they've experienced in the Christian realm. And so we meet and talk about different topics like purity culture or gender and sexuality or parenting or family relationships. And it really is a space that's meant to hold and foster conversation among these folks in a relatively safe space with no sort of agenda that they then turn around and become the perfect Presbyterian or the perfect Methodist, or that they suddenly redigest all these theological doctrines. So I think that has been this really interesting model of shaping a community with no agenda toward reeling people back in.
That's really interesting to hear. Again, like Eric said, we're a traditional church, and so we do the programming and we do the different types of ministries.
Which I think, excuse me to interrupt, but I think does minister to a ton of people.
Oh, for sure.
But also recognizing that it's not ministering to everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So just like kind of drawing that road a little bit wider to say like, oh, well, maybe it can also look like this.
Right.
So as you work with these students and recognize kind of what their needs are that may look different than for somebody like me who, you know, come to church every week. And, so if their needs are looking different, what are your hopes then for them? Like as they continue to grow and they start to develop whatever it looks like for them as they leave college and as they start families or friendships and community for themselves, what are your hopes that they will continue to develop or start afresh?
Yeah, I think, you know, that is so dependent on who each student is. And I think that's part of the foundational value that I hold is that my hope for every student is different, right? And I think that that's part of how we have to start viewing the world is not through this lens of like, how do we use our ministries to like produce certain kinds of people, but like how do we show up and really accompany individuals or bring them into community that might have different results for each person. But I think overall, I always hope that students walk away with a sense of permission to be curious. A lot of times I think whether the message has been received through a former faith tradition or through academia, there is this very real sense, I think, that students walk away feeling like they cannot ask questions or that things are prescribed and they have to either choose to push against them or fit themselves into that. And really a lot of what I seek to do in ministry is just open up the realm of mystery and to say, what if there's more there than you previously thought? I mean, and that's very personal to me and my spirituality, but a lot of what I hope that students walk away with is a sense of like living into the tension of uncertainty. Because I think not only is that really spiritually enriching, but I think just as humans, we all live in the world a little bit more freely when we have permission not to know. And I think that that's something that can be applied both in a faith tradition, but also for students that I've ministered to that are not religious, right? Who are spiritual or who say, I wanted community. I'm not keen on the doctrinal piece of this. I think that's still a takeaway that will carry them well into the next phase of their life, and then the next one and the next one of, whether they choose to start a family or move somewhere or, if they're caring for a parent. Like, that's all so much richer when the student can say, I don't know exactly what this looks like, but I'm going to engage here.
I love that. I think personally, I would agree that I think curiosity is the catalyst for growth for any of us, whether that's in a spiritual context or an academic one. And
Absolutely.
Somebody in my life used to say that the purpose of going to college is to learn how to learn. And so if we're not learning how to ask questions, or if we're not gaining the permission to do so, again, either in an academic or a spiritual environment, then I think we're missing opportunities for growth. And we read in scriptures and hear in songs, that when we seek God, that God has revealed to us. And a lot of times for me, that looks like asking questions. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing all that.
Sure.
How do we support your ministry and what you're doing at SMU and the work that you continue to do?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think that being curious about Gen Z and about college students in general is just my call to everyone. I think whenever we talk about different generations, there's an immediate sense of like us versus them, or skepticism, or curiosity, but not necessarily good curiosity. And so,
what are they doing over there?
Yeah, why are they only wearing white sneakers?
Yeah.
I'm guilty of
Mine
that
are
now.
gray. But,
No, and I think just looking for the people in your own lives who are part of this generation and sitting and taking them seriously and allowing them the space to share what's important to them and what questions they have. What are they still trying to figure out, and what are they wrestling with? I think that is such a gift. So much of my one-on-one pastoral care with students is about helping students feel their feelings. And I think that's a call we all have on one another.
I do not feel my feelings well.
Well, maybe we can work on that. But like that kind of simple amount of showing up and caring is so vital to living together in community. I think beyond that, our ministry is grateful to have church partners, and we have folks that come provide meals every week, which is such a cool opportunity to bring in other generations to our space, to create the church there and say to these students, like, you're not alone, right? Like, you have your peers here, but also like, here's the women's Bible study from this church down the road, and they're all in their 80s, and they brought you baked potatoes tonight. There's just such a nurturing spirit there of exchange that we've tried to really build into who we are. So would love to have y'all do that if you're interested sometime. But I think just generally recognizing that campus ministry is a really, really vital part of the church, and supporting not just our ministry, but other ministries in the area, in your denomination, that are filling this real gap between what happens when you're in high school and when you come back as a young adult, hopefully.
Right. Well, I appreciate you sharing all of this. One of my last questions for you was going to be, what are these tangible ways that we could support you? But I also want to just make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying, that, for those college students that are our kids, grandkids, friends, we just listen, we create space for them. And that's a tangible way that we can support them.
Absolutely. Yep.
Awesome. I feel like we are all equipped to do that in some way. Even you, Eric.
Thank you. I can hear other people's feelings. For what it's worth. Yeah, I digress.
Well, Jessie, thank you so much for the time today and for sharing about your work and your students and educating us on best ways to support what you do and these kids that we all care about.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the More Than Sunday podcast. Any of the resources that Jessie mentioned we'll make available on our website, which is www.fumcr.com/morethansunday. So check it out if you want to look back for other ways that you could support UKirk at SMU. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you have a great week.